Okay, I want you to forget what you think you know about the founding of the American colonies. Seriously. Because this isn't your typical story about gold or religious freedom. No, the colony of Georgia, it was born from this radical, almost wild idea. What if we could build a perfect society from scratch? But as we're about to see, this grand social experiment was basically a powder keg from day one. So how did this utopian dream actually play out? Well, first we'll dig into the experiment's really ambitious goals. Then we're going to meet some unexpected groups who ended up becoming its backbone. We'll also explore the growing discontent that really threatened to tear the whole thing apart. And finally, we'll witness the exact moment the dream was just abandoned for good. You know, right from the very beginning, Georgia was a colony with a bit of a split personality. It wasn't just about claiming new land. This was a project completely torn between two missions: building a truly moral society and serving the cold, hard needs of an empire. And you can see that core tension right here on this slide. On one side, you've got the trustees, these English social reformers dreaming of a moral utopia. They pictured this land of hardworking farmers, totally free from what they saw as the two great evils of the time, slavery and rum. But then, on the other side, the British Crown had a much more practical checklist. They wanted Georgia to produce valuable stuff like silk and wine, and, this is crucial, to act as a human shield between their super wealthy South Carolina colony and Spanish-held Florida. This clash between ideals and reality, well, it came to a head almost immediately. The colony was on the brink of complete collapse in its very first year. And its survival, it ended up depending on a group of people who, according to the official rules, shouldn't have even been allowed to set foot there. And this brings us to the colony's first huge test. The official charter was crystal clear. Jewish settlers were explicitly banned. No exceptions. But then, in the sweltering heat of 1733, a ship appears out of nowhere, carrying 42 Jewish refugees. So the colony's leader, James Oglethorpe, he's faced with this life or death choice. Does he follow the rules, or does he save his people? Just look at this timeline. It's wild. A few months after landing, the colony's only doctor dies. Then, a devastating yellow fever outbreak starts sweeping through the settlement. And right at that moment, in July, that ship arrives. And who's on board? A doctor named Samuel Nunez. Oglethorpe chose pragmatism over policy. He welcomed the doctor, whose medical knowledge was the only thing that could stop the epidemic and save the entire colony. So this group's impact was immediate and just profound. They directly solved the colony's two biggest problems. Dr. Nunez heroically tackled the health crisis, saving countless lives. At the same time, another settler, Abraham DeLyon, brought this desperately needed expertise in winemaking, which, remember, was a key economic goal for the Crown. It's an incredible story. They not only saved the colony from collapse, but also built a lasting community, founding Congregation Mikveh Israel, which is still the third oldest in the entire United States. And this pattern of these specialized groups coming in and saving the day, it just kept happening. So next up, we have two communities who would become the absolute pillars of the colony, the Salzburgers and the Highland Scots. Both of them really embodied the trustees' vision, but they did it in very, very different ways. First, let's talk about the Salzburgers. These were German-speaking Protestants who were fleeing intense religious persecution back in Austria. And when they were offered a new home in Georgia, their gratitude was so deep that they named their first settlement Ebenezer, which means stone of help, a direct reflection of their faith. Now, after a really rough start in a swampy area, they moved, and they absolutely thrived. They became the most industrious and successful colonists by far. They set up mills, schools, even an orphanage. And get this, they were the only group to have any real large-scale success with silk production, which was one of the Crown's main reasons for starting the colony in the first place. But at the same time, the colony needed protectors. And this is where the Highland Scots came in. You can see the contrast right here. The Salzburgers were the pious farmers, the producers. The Scots, they were the fierce soldiers. But notice the critical thing they had in common. Both groups were staunchly, passionately anti-slavery. Oglethorpe was smart. He strategically settled these legendary soldiers in a town called Darien, putting them right on the dangerous frontier with Spanish Florida. They were the colony's muscle, its first line of defense. And they proved their worth spectacularly, especially at the Battle of Bloody Marsh, where their ferocity was absolutely essential in fighting off a major Spanish invasion and securing the colony's future. So with these loyal, hardworking groups, it really seems like the trustees' vision was working, right? But not everyone was on board. A growing and very loud group of colonists began to push back, hard, against the very rules that made Georgia so unique. They became known as the malcontents. And here's the key difference between them and groups like the Salzburgers. The malcontents had paid their own way to Georgia. They didn't see themselves as getting a handout from the trustees. They saw themselves as investors who were being held back by all these restrictive rules. Their complaints were pretty simple, and they were all about economics. I mean, they just had to look north to South Carolina, where massive fortunes were being built on the backs of enslaved people working on huge plantations. They wanted a piece of that action. So to them, the trustees' bans on slavery, rum, and big land grants weren't noble ideals. They were just obstacles to getting rich. This relentless pressure from the malcontents, who were publishing pamphlets and lobbying officials back in both Georgia and Great Britain, it just began to chip away at the very foundation of the experiment. And eventually, the trustees' grand vision just collapsed. As this timeline shows, the whole thing unraveled incredibly quickly. After the colony's founder and biggest defender, James Oglethorpe, left for good, the malcontents' arguments really started to gain traction. In 1750, the trustees finally caved. They passed a law allowing slavery. And with that, the central principle of their utopian vision was gone, and the entire trustee period ended a year ahead of schedule. In the end, this quote really says it all. The economic pressures, the desire for that plantation-style economy, it just completely overwhelmed the social ideals of the founders. Georgia would go on to become a colony much like all the others, built on slavery and unrestricted commerce. And that leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. Was the trustees' vision for this slavery-free society of small farmers a noble experiment that just happened to fail? Or was it an impossible dream from the very beginning, something totally doomed by the economic realities of the 18th century colonial world? It's a powerful reminder that history is so often a battle between our highest ideals and our immediate interests.